Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Newkirk. I am Manager of Digital Media at Loebsack and Brownlee, and I am here today with Managing Principal Chris Loebsack. We are today going over sexual harassment. HUD is focusing on sexual harassment as their theme for National Fair Housing Month, which ends tomorrow. So we just wanted to do a really quick Q&A. Chris, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Yep. Hi, folks. I hope you're having a wonderful April as we get to the close of the month. April is every year HUD's Fair Housing Month, and each year they focus on a different aspect of fair housing. And this year it is sexual harassment in housing that they focused on. So these are going to be just a real quick Q&A on some of the really hot topics that deal with that particular fair housing item. So,
all right. So the first question that I have for you, Chris, is just what is sexual harassment? Let's get that out of the way.
Sure. Sexual harassment in housing. HUD actually has a whole white paper on this that they put out in support of this month's endeavors. But it says, according to HUD, sexual harassment in housing is a form of sex discrimination prohibited by the Fair Housing Act. Sex discrimination is also prohibited by other laws. But there's two types of sexual harassment that occur in the housing situation: quid pro quo sexual harassment and hostile environment sexual harassment. So quid pro quo, of course, is fancy legal terminology. It's the Latin usage of words that implies this for that. If you translate it literally, that's what it means. So it's literally, in regular English terms, it's if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So quid pro quo sexual harassment is any kind of communication involving a resident of a rental property where they are either proposed to or forced to participate in a this for that transaction. If you do this for me, I'll do that for you.
Okay. So the next question that comes to mind is a hostile environment. What is a hostile environment? How does someone create that when it comes to, sexual harassment in fair housing?
Sure. So hostile environment harassment occurs when a housing provider provides a person or subjects a person to severe or pervasive, I do that every time. Severe or pervasive, unwelcome sexual conduct that interferes with the sale or rental of any dwelling. So the key thing here is severe or pervasive, unwelcome sexual conduct. Now, the really key component of that definition, which is different than quid pro quo, is that it doesn't have to involve an actual intent to seek sexual favors. In the hostile environment scenario, it is really about what is the tenant's perception of the environment that they find themselves in. And so if they are being propositioned regularly, if they are being exposed to actions or conducts that are making the environment unwelcome, then that can be transitioned into a concept of sexual harassment in fair housing. The point of this one is really to translate over from employment law, where we all now have a very good familiarity with sexual harassment in the workplace and hostile work environments. That concept is what HUD used to build this rule in its sexual harassment rule that it issued in 2016. They really envisioned that the hostile environment liability in a fair housing standpoint is supposed to mirror the same concepts that you have in a hostile work environment claim under labor laws.
Can you give me an example of a hostile environment that may be created?
Sure. There's a number of real possible ways to do it, but I like to think of one that really sort of highlights for people how day-to-day this really can be and how it really does force our clients to focus on issues that they used to think of as non-issues because it was a resident versus resident problem. Obviously, hostile environment can be created by a landlord or a property manager or assistant property manager who is openly propositioning residents or openly telling applicants that they can't get an apartment if they don't do X, Y, or Z sexual favor for them. That's easy. Those are no-brainers. But the one that's really hard is, what about resident versus resident? That is a problem under the Fair Housing Act. Under this new law, well, it's not a law, under this new rule dealing with sexual harassment in rental housing, the folks at HUD have really made clear that if you have a situation where one resident is harassing another, you as the property management professionals have an obligation to both A, recognize that as a possible fair housing problem, and B, do something about it, at least insofar as investigating the claims and determining what you believe to have happened. Didn't used to be that way. 20 years ago, nobody would have thought anything if one of your residents came to your office and said, I believe that Bob is just ogling me every time I'm at the pool in my bikini trying to get some sunshine and read a magazine. Bob seems like he's staring at me and it just makes me feel all creepy. Normally, 20 years ago, nobody would have batted an eyeball about that. It wouldn't have mattered. That would have been a resident versus resident problem, and clients would have regularly just told them that they should work it out, or try and find different times of day to go to the pool.
Right.
Under this scenario, that's not the way this is supposed to be analyzed anymore. HUD wants you to appreciate that that could be a hostile sexual environment. If a resident who is female, for example, in this example, is using the pool, which she pays money to be able to do, and is being ogled by a male resident who makes it a mission of his to stare at her from his balcony, which is near the pool, every time she's out there, and make her feel uncomfortable, that is a hostile environment. And the landlord, in that case, has a duty to help the female resident get her environment fixed. And that is news to a lot of our clients. So quid pro quo is different in that it's a this for that transaction. But there's also a similar way to think of this in non-prurient terms anyway. It doesn't have to be openly, you can't live here unless, I won't approve your application unless you do X, Y, or Z sexual favor. Clearly, that is a quid pro quo transaction. But the other things, you can get any number of other variations on that theme. The most important variation, though, is that it doesn't have to be your employees or staff that are doing it. So if there is an outside vendor who, let's say you have a painting contractor that sends people onto your property, and then you're in the middle of a renovation, and so you're updating everybody's paint in the hallways at all the buildings over the course of a summer. Well, if you have the same vendor who's doing that work, they probably have a crew, and they're sending the same people there on a pretty regular basis. Well, if one of those people that is there for the course of this coming summer happens to be a creep and happens to take a liking to one of the residents that he sees because she lives in the building they started with, and that guy, the painting contractor's employee, not yours, not your maintenance staff, but your painting contracting vendor, and their employee is the one being creepy, doing things like sending that resident all kinds of social media messages, DMing her all over the place, sending text messages, asking if he can take her out to dinner for weeks and weeks, and she has to go every day for a week through that building to get to her apartment, and that's what they're doing, is painting her building. She has to see him, she can't avoid him, and he keeps propositioning her, and that kind of scenario can be totally differential. Let's say that guy says to her, hey, if you let me take you out to dinner on Friday, then I promise you I'll get you the extra coat of paint that you were looking for inside your unit. I'll do the painting for free on Saturday. That kind of liability can happen. And it doesn't matter that it isn't your employee that's doing it. If it is a vendor's employee, you have just as much power to control who is a vendor and who isn't a vendor at your property. And if they're in the middle of a painting project and you're committed to them, and you find out about that scenario because that resident comes to you and complains about the actions of that painting contractor employee, you have an obligation to do something about it. You cannot say, well, I can't help that. They just supply whoever they supply.
Right.
That's not an acceptable answer. And HUD expects you to do something about it if you find out about that. Things like let your regional manager know that you have a situation where there might be a sexual harassment course of conduct going on for one of your residents, and we might need to talk to our vendor and the owner of that company about who they're sending to our property. That kind of conduct is the sort of thing that may need to be done now. Those things are new and different and not part of everyone's normal fair housing training.
So when should I contact a lawyer? When is that time that we need to contact someone and start to take legal action, Chris?
I think that a resident who finds themselves in this situation should bring it to the property manager's attention first. And really what I would tell our clients is, if you don't pay attention and you don't do the kinds of things that HUD is looking for you to do, investigate, find out the facts, interview people involved, make sure that you know what is actually going on, then you can expect them to go to a lawyer if you give them a crummy answer. If you pretend like it's water under the bridge, if you try to sweep it under the rug, if you give the resident short shrift because it's not your employee, it's an outside painting contractor that they're dealing with, they're going to go find a lawyer. They're going to go ask. And they may not even need to do that because you don't actually need a lawyer to initiate a fair housing complaint. The information is available all over the internet, and HUD makes it very easy to electronically send them a message saying, I believe I'm being discriminated against. People can find those links very quickly and easily, and once they submit that information to HUD, HUD will open the investigation itself. You don't need a lawyer involved. And so really the truth of the matter is that your response is going to dictate 90% of the time what happens next. A bad answer, a bad response to someone who comes to your office and has already worked up the gumption to tell you that they think they're being sexually harassed is probably ready to report the matter to somebody if you don't give them the information they need. It's the people who don't speak up that HUD is trying to embolden and encourage. But if they come to you and they tell you there's a problem, chances are that if you don't help them solve the problem, they're going to go call someone else, either a lawyer or HUD or both, who will get you to solve the problem.
Right. That's great information. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate you answering all of those questions. And again, if you have any questions or if you'd like more information on what you can do if you're a victim, or if you just want general information, please click on the links below. We brought those to you directly from HUD. Chris, thank you again so much for your time.
Thanks, Liz. I appreciate it. Everyone, have a great rest of your Fair Housing Month in April.